Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a winter's morning in medieval Europe, a time when the sun seems to hit the snooze button and the cold bites harder than a Midwest January. You're about to spend a day in the life of a peasant who frankly would think your thermostat is a fairy tale invention. And yes, you probably won't survive this unless you have a medieval aunt with suspiciously good wool stockpiling skills. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the sound of nothing. No buzzing phone, no neighbor's lawn mower, no early delivery truck rumbling down the street. Just the silence of frost gripping every beam of your thatched roof. Your breath curls into pale clouds, above you ghostly shapes that drift upward only to vanish into the cold like unpaid promises. The straw mattress is more prickles than comfort, and the wool blanket is a battlefield of warmth against the draft sneaking through the walls. Your toes are stiff, each one protesting as you push them toward the edge of the bed. The floor is stone, or worse packed earth gone rigid as iron. You step down, and it's like dipping your foot into a cooler full of ice water at a 4th of July barbecue. Only no hot dogs or fireworks to soften the blow. Somewhere in the dark, the coals in the hearth are sulking, offering a glow about as convincing as the heating button on a budget motel hairdryer. You shuffle toward the fire pit. The smoke from last night's embers still hangs in the air, stinging your eyes. You poke the coals with a stick that's seen better winters. Sparks jump a tiny rebellion against the cold, but the warmth barely reaches your fingertips. It's like standing in front of an open oven for 1 second before someone slams the door shut again. Outside, the thatch is glittering under a thick frost. The light hasn't decided to show up yet, and you suspect the sun is also curled up under some cosmic blanket. A distant rooster calls, sounding more annoyed than triumphant, like a barista starting a shift before the espresso machine's warmed up. Somewhere beyond the door, you hear the slow shuffle of the cow in her stall. She's hungry, and in her mind, you're already late. The air smells of smoke, damp wool, and that faint metallic note of frost that you can taste if you breathe deep enough. Every movement feels like it costs more energy than it gives back. Your hands find the clay mug from last night, still half full of water now, with a delicate skin of ice across the top. You break it with a finger cold enough to make you gasp and drink, because there's no better option. You think of warmth the way someone in the 1990s thought of fast internet, a luxury almost mythical and rarely where you need it. The truth is, winter mornings here aren't about comfort. They're about survival dressed in the smallest, most practical routines. And as the day unfolds, you'll find that every action, from lighting the fire to feeding the animals, is a small, stubborn victory against a season that wants nothing more than to wear you down. And so, with the frost still clinging to the thatch and the hearth grudgingly waking your winter's day, begins. The hearth stirs, but only just. You crouch beside it, feeding in thin slivers of kindling, like bribes to a lazy bureaucrat. Each twig pops and snaps, reluctant to burn, as if it knows it's about to die for your comfort. Your breath fogs the air, curling into the smoke that snakes upward, and somehow still finds your eyes. You wipe them with the back of your hand, smearing a mix of ash and last night's sleep across your cheek. The smell is a stubborn blend of charred wood and damp soot, Not entirely unpleasant, but definitely not the kind of cozy fireplace candle you'd find in a holiday aisle. The warmth, when it finally decides to arrive, comes in slow waves, thin, almost shy. You hover your hands over it, fingers spread wide, pretending it's enough. It's like standing in front of the open door of a 1990s fridge, hoping for cold air when the power's out. Except here, you're chasing heat instead. You can hear the muffled stirrings of life outside a cow shifting in her stall, hooves tapping against wooden boards. The faint cluck of a chicken still half asleep in the roost. A distant creak as frost loosens its grip on the thatch above. There's no rush of traffic, no garbage truck growl, just the patient slow beat of a countryside morning that hasn't changed in centuries. You toss a thicker log into the fire, watching the bark blister and crackle. The flames lick upward, hesitant, then surge in a sudden gust, like a timid singer finally hitting the note. You feel the first real breath of warmth against your skin. It's fragile step too far back, and you're right back in the cold. From the doorway, a draft snakes in icy and insistent. You pull your wool tunic tighter, the fabric rough against your neck. Every seam reminds you it was mended in haste probably last winter, when the cold outpaced your needle. A loose thread tickles your wrist. You leave it, it's not worth fixing right now. The pot hanging over the fire still holds yesterday's stew, congealed into a solid mass. You prod it with a spoon, breaking the surface. It's stubborn heavy, but as it softens, the smell of onion barley and something vaguely meaty fills the air. Not a feast, but breakfast here is about survival, not indulgence. You sip from a cup of lukewarm ale. It's safer than water and warmer than nothing. The taste is flat, slightly sour, but it slides down with a kind of quiet reassurance. Your stomach wakes up grumbling, like a neighbor's dog that's been left outside too long. The first light finally seeps through the small window, turning the frost into a pale shimmer. Outside, the fields are empty, blanketed in frost that crunches under every step. It's beautiful, in a way the kind of beauty you admire for 3 seconds before remembering it's also trying to kill you. You think back to last winter when the firewood pile ran low by February and you burned broken furniture to make it through. That's the kind of memory that makes you treat every scrap of wood like gold. The warmth from the hearth is finally enough to coax you into the day. You pull on your boots, stiff with yesterday's frost, and stand. The smoke still lingers in the air, clinging to your clothes, your hair, your skin. You'll carry that smell all day, the way a modern commuter carries the scent of subway breaks or gas station coffee. With the fire holding its own, and your stomach at least partially appeased, it's time to face the chores waiting beyond the door. The animals aren't patient, and the frost outside doesn't care if you're ready or not. And so you step toward the cold, the hearth's fading warmth at your back, and the first real work of the day ahead. The hearth stirs, but only just. You crouch low knees, protesting in the cold, feeding in thin slivers of kindling, like bribes to a lazy bureaucrat. Each twig pops and snaps, reluctant to burn, as if it knows it's about to die for your comfort. Your breath fogs the air, curling into the smoke that snakes upward, and somehow still finds your eyes. You wipe them with the back of your hand, smearing a mix of ash and last night's sleep across your cheek. The smell is a stubborn blend of charred oak and damp soot, not entirely unpleasant, but definitely not the kind of cozy fireplace candle you'd find in a holiday aisle. The warmth, when it finally decides to arrive, comes in thin, shy waves. You hover your hands over it, fingers spread wide, pretending it's enough. It's like standing in front of the open door of a budget motel hairdryer, brief, tepid, and slightly disappointing. The fire here isn't just warmth, it's survival. In winter, peasants measured their security not in coins, but in stacks of split wood. The church might preach charity, but charity doesn't keep the frost from creeping into your bones at 3 a.m. You've seen families trade a week's worth of bread for a few armfuls of oak, and no one called it unfair. From outside comes the muffled stirrings of life, a cow shifting in her stall hooves, tapping against wooden boards, the faint cluck of a chicken, still half asleep in the roost, the creak of frost loosening its grip on the thatch above. The village is still wrapped in gray silence. No blacksmith's hammer, no chatter from the road, just the patient slow beat of a countryside morning that hasn't changed in centuries. You toss a thicker log into the fire, watching the bark blister and crackle. The flames lick upward, hesitant, then surge in a sudden gust, like a timid singer finally hitting the note. The heat touches your skin, fragile, almost shy, but it's there. Step too far back, and you'll be right back in the cold. You shift closer. The skin on your knuckles feels tight and dry, ready to split if you flex too hard. The door is little more than rough planks lashed together, and every gap between them is a spy hole for the wind. You pull your wool tunic tighter, the fabric coarse against your neck. Every seam reminds you it was mended in haste, probably last winter, when the cold outpaced your needle. A loose thread tickles your wrist. You leave it, it's not worth fixing right now. The pot hanging over the fire still holds yesterday's stew, now a congealed slab. You prod it with a wooden spoon, breaking the surface. It's stubborn and heavy, but as it softens, the smell of onion barley and a hint of salted pork fills the air. Not a feast, but breakfast here is about survival, not indulgence. You stir slowly, letting the heat spread, and watch the fat melt into thin ribbons. You sip from a cup of weak ale. It's safer than water, warmer than nothing. The taste is flat, slightly sour, but it slides down with a kind of quiet reassurance. Your stomach wakes up grumbling like a neighbor's dog left outside too long. Beside you, a small loaf of bread sits wrapped in cloth. It's hard enough to chip a tooth, but you'll dip it in the stew to soften it. The bread is as soft as last year's fruitcake, the one everyone kept re-gifting until someone finally threw it out. Light finally seeps through the tiny window, pale and cautious. It catches the frost on the sill, making it sparkle like sugar dusting on a pie, though no one here has tasted pie in years. Outside, the fields lie empty, blanketed in frost that crunches under every step. It's beautiful, in a way the kind of beauty you admire for 3 seconds, before remembering it's also trying to kill you. You think back to last winter, when the woodpile ran low by February, and you burned a broken stool to make it through. That memory makes you treat every scrap of wood like treasure. You also remember the neighbor's boy losing 2 fingers to frostbite because his family's fire went out for a night. In this world, cold is more patient than hunger. It can wait for you to slip just once. The stew is ready. You ladle it into a bowl, steam curling upward like a fragile promise. The first spoonful burns your tongue, but you welcome it. Heat on the inside is almost as important as heat on the outside. You sit on the stool nearest the hearth, soaking in every flicker of warmth. For a moment, you feel almost human again, but the animals won't feed themselves, and the day won't wait. You pull on your boots, stiff from yesterday's frost, and stand. They scrape against the floor, like wooden clogs sending a small echo into the quiet room. You fasten your cloak, a patchwork of wool scraps, and lift the latch. The door groans open, letting in a gust so sharp it feels like it could shave you bald. The smell of cold hits you first clean, metallic and merciless. Your breath spills out in thick clouds. Somewhere in the barn, the cow lows impatiently. Chickens mutter from their coop, their feathers puffed up like they're trying to impersonate feathered pumpkins. A magpie darts across the yard, a streak of black and white against the endless white of frost. You glance back once at the hearth. Its warmth is already fading, retreating into the shadows. You'll keep it alive all day, feeding it in stolen moments between chores. In winter, the fire is not a luxury. It's a living thing you care for like an animal, because it cares for you back. And so, with the frost crunching underfoot, and the breath of the hearth still clinging faintly to your cloak, you step into the yard, ready for the first real work of the day. The frost bites deeper the moment you leave the shelter of the cottage. It clings to your eyelashes, a whisper of ice with every blink. Your breath pours out in thick clouds, mingling with the faint mist curling off the thatched roofs of your neighbors' homes. The air has a weight to it, as if it presses down from above, urging you back indoors. But there's no choice. There's water to fetch, and the well is waiting. You trudge toward it, the path familiar under your boots, but treacherous today. Each step crunches on a crust of frost, the sound crisp in the otherwise muffled stillness. The sky is a washed-out gray, like wet wool stretched thin. You pass the chicken coop, the birds inside, muttering softly, their breathless sounds barely louder than the creak of the wooden boards. They'll be fed soon enough, but first the well. The village well sits at the center of the green, though in winter it's more of a brown and white patchwork. The rope hangs stiff, rimed with ice crystals that catch the faint light. The bucket is frozen where it rests, and it takes 2 solid kicks to jar it loose. Your toes protest inside your boots, the impact jolting through bone. You grip the rope, its fibers rough and biting against your palms, and begin to lower the bucket. The pulley groans like an old man getting up from a too-soft chair. The bucket disappears into the darkness, the rope growing heavier with each turn. Then a splash, muffled and distant. You crank it back up the wet rope, stiffening almost instantly as the air claims it. The bucket emerges crowned with a rim of ice sloshing water that smells faintly of minerals and winter. You set it down carefully. The cold makes it feel heavier than it is the metal handle, pressing hard into your skin. Your fingers ache from the grip, the kind of deep ache that doesn't fade until you're back by the fire. Still, there's a strange satisfaction in the task pulling life from the earth, even when the earth is locked in ice. On the way back, you pass old Marta's cottage. Smoke curls from her chimney, a thin and steady line. She's known for hoarding kindling the way others hoard gossip. Some say she once filled her attic with enough wood to last 3 winters. Others insist it's just a tale she tells to make her seem clever. Some historians think this was common. Others call it pure myth. Either way, her fire rarely falters and her bread is always warm. You pause at your own door to shift the bucket to your other hand, fingers numb. The cottage smells faintly of smoke and stew, and the hearth's glow reaches toward you like a lazy cat stretching in the sun. You set the bucket near the wall where the water will stay liquid a little longer and head back out. There's still livestock to tend. The barn greets you with the earthy musk of hay manure and animal breath. It's warmer here, but only by a whisper. Your cow turns her head towards you, eyes large and unblinking breath steaming in soft clouds. She's been waiting, and she lets out a low sound, half complaint, half greeting. You grab the hay fork and pile a generous heap into her manger. She digs in, immediately tearing at the stalks with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Next are the chickens. You scatter grain across the straw-strewn floor, the birds rushing forward in a feathery flurry. Their claws scratch against the wood, and the soft thump of beaks pecking fills the air. One hen, the boldest of the lot, pecks at your boot before returning to the grain. You shake your head, at least she's not roosting in the rafters again. Outside, the cold hasn't softened. The wind stirs now, sliding icy fingers down your collar. You tighten your cloak and glance toward the tree line. In the far distance, smoke rises from another homestead, thin and pale against the dull sky. You wonder how many fires in the village will still be burning come spring, and how many will go out before their time. Back inside, you ladle some warm water from the bucket into a clay basin, breaking the thin film of ice that's already forming on top. The water chills your hands instantly, but it's enough to rinse away the grit from the morning's work. You dry them on a piece of rough linen, the fabric stiff from repeated washings in hard water. The stew on the hearth is calling again. You pour yourself another ladleful more for the heat than for the hunger. The warmth seeps into you, spreading slowly, filling the hollow spaces carved by the cold. The bread softens in the broth, and for a few moments you let yourself enjoy the small luxury. The day is still young, but winter days feel shorter than they should. The light outside is already shifting, sliding toward that flat silver quality that means afternoon is near. Soon you'll be mending tools, patching clothes, or spinning wool indoor work that doesn't require braving the frost. For now, though, the fire crackles softly, the animals are fed, and your hands are thawing in the steam from your bowl. There's satisfaction in this rhythm, in knowing each task is a step in keeping the cold at bay. It's not comfort, as the modern world knows it. It's survival, dressed in quiet, ordinary acts. And as you glance toward the door, where the frost is already creeping back along the edges, you know you'll be out there again soon, meeting the cold head-on. The morning has settled into that strange winter rhythm, too slow to be rushed, too steady to feel idle. You step outside again, pulling the door closed against the stubborn draft, and the cold greets you like an old, unfriendly acquaintance. The kind that insists on shaking your hand a little too long just to remind you who's in charge. Today's work takes you toward the field edges. Even in the dead of winter, there's always something to be done. Hedges to set ditches, to clear tools, to check for rust. The ground crunches beneath your boots, a mix of frozen soil and last year's straw. Every breath turns into a puff of mist, and the sound of it blends with the faint whistle of the wind through bare branches. The path to the far field passes the blacksmith's cottage. His forge is cold today. There's little ironwork needed when the land sleeps. You nod at the door out of habit, though you know he's likely still inside mending a hinge or shaping a nail by lamplight. Winter is the season when work turns inward. The fields wait patient as a cat until the first real thaw. Reaching the edge of the hedgerow, you set down your bundle of stakes. The hedge is your village's fence line, keeping animals in, and sometimes less welcome creatures out. The wood is hard from the cold, and each stake needs to be driven deep. You grip the mallet, its handle polished smooth from years of hands, and bring it down in steady, deliberate blows. The sound echoes in the quiet air, a rhythmic thud that seems to keep time with your breath. The work is physical, but there's a certain comfort in it. Your muscles warm, the blood pushes against the cold in your fingertips, and for a while, you almost forget about the frost creeping along your cloak's hem. You pause to straighten, rubbing your lower back. From here, the village looks like a scattering of toy houses under a blanket of pale sky. Smoke rises in lazy spirals from each chimney as if the whole place is breathing together. Beyond the hedgerow, the ditch runs along the path toward the next field. Winter rains have filled it in places, and ice glistens in patches where the sun hasn't reached. You break the crust carefully, letting the trapped water run free. It's work that feels small, almost thankless, but you know a flooded ditch in winter means a muddy field come spring, and a muddy field is a hungry one. Halfway down the ditch, you spot movement in the trees. A fox, its fur thick and red against the white, watches you with sharp eyes. For a moment, neither of you moves. Then it turns, slipping silently back into the undergrowth. You know it's hunting, probably the same rabbits you've seen darting through the hedges. Out here, everyone's working for their supper, no matter how many legs they have. You take a break, leaning on the handle of your mallet. The wind shifts, carrying the smell of wood smoke and something baking, maybe Marta's bread again. You'd trade a good hour of work for a fresh slice still warm, but barter like that isn't part of the day's plan. Your hands ache when you start the next stretch of hedge. The gloves you wear are more holes than cloth, and the cold creeps in without asking. The stakes wobble when you set them, the frozen ground, refusing to give way easily. You think about spring, about the first shoots of green pushing up through the soil. It's the kind of thought that keeps you swinging the mallet when your arms want to quit. By midday, the hedgerow is secure, the ditch running clear. You take a slow walk back toward the cottage, the light already shifting toward the flat silver of afternoon. The road is bumpier than your uncle's political opinions at Thanksgiving, each frozen rut threatening to twist an ankle. You keep your steps careful, the water in the bucket from earlier sloshing gently at your side. Back home, you push the door open and step into the dim, smoky warmth. The hearth is still alive, though the fire has slumped into glowing coals. You kneel to feed it more wood, coaxing the flames back to life. The stew on the pot's edge has thickened again. You stir it slowly, letting the scent of barley and onion rise into the air. You sit on the stool, closest to the fire, stretching your legs toward the heat. The warmth seeps through your boots, melting the frost that clings to the leather. A few drops of water slide down to the floor, darkening the wood. You remove your gloves, flexing your fingers until the stiffness eases. They're red and rough, but the blood flows freely now. Lunch is simple: a ladle of stew, a crust of bread, and a small wedge of cheese saved from last market day. You eat slowly, savoring the way the heat from the bowl seeps into your hands as much as your stomach. The bread softens in the broth, and you use the last bite to scrape the sides clean. Outside, the wind picks up again, rattling the shutters. You know there's still work ahead: tools to mend rope, to twist perhaps a snare or two, to check before dark. Winter doesn't leave room for wasted hours. For now, though, you rest a moment longer, letting the fire paint your face with its quiet glow. Your eyes drift toward the door, and beyond it, the cold world waits. The day isn't done, and the frost will still be there when you step back out. And so, with the warmth still on your skin and the taste of barley lingering, you prepare for the next round of work that winter always demands. The warmth from lunch lingers only a little while. It's the sort of heat that hides in your stomach and chest, but refuses to travel to your hands and feet. You stand brushing crumbs from your tunic and glance around the dim room. There's one job that can't wait until spring mending the tools. In winter, every cracked handle and dull blade becomes a bigger problem than it ought to be. You bring the wooden flail from its corner. The leather thongs are stiff with cold, the wood worn smooth where your palms have gripped it over and over. Threshing isn't just a harvest job. In winter, any grain stored with the husks still clinging needs to be finished, else it risks mold. You set the flail aside for later and pull your small sharpening stone from a pouch hanging by the door. The thing is worn to a thin oval, edges rounded from years of work. A sickle blade lies on the table, dulled from summer and fall. You brace it against your knee and begin working the stone along its curve. The sound is steady scrape, 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 like someone dragging a coin over wood. The smell of metal rises faintly, mingling with the smoke of the hearth. The rhythm becomes almost soothing, the way knitting might be in some future century. Your hands remember each tool's quirks. The axe has a chip in its edge where it met a stubborn knot in the woodpile. The spade's handle is loose, wobbling slightly when you grip it. You work methodically, tightening, oiling, polishing, until the tools are closer to ready. It's not glamour, but it's the quiet kind of work that makes survival possible. A knock at the door interrupts you. It's Tom, your neighbor, wrapped in a patched cloak, with frost clinging to his beard. He carries a small sack of barley and a coil of rope over one shoulder. "Trade?" he asks, his breath puffing in little clouds. You glance at your small wheel of cheese and the extra loaf you baked yesterday. In a few minutes, the exchange is made: barley for cheese, rope for bread. No coin changes hands. In winter, trust is worth more than silver. After Tom leaves, you coil the rope neatly. It's coarse and smells faintly of hemp and smoke, but it will serve for tying a fence post or hanging meat to dry. You stow it near the door and pull the flail back into your hands. The threshing floor is in the barn, and the barn is colder than you'd like, but it's where the work needs doing. You step outside again, boots crunching on frost that hasn't softened since morning. The barn door resists at first, the wood swollen and stiff from the damp. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of hay and the warm musk of animals. Light spills in from the gaps in the walls, long, thin beams, dusted with floating chaff. You spread a small heap of grain stalks on the floor and take your stance. The flail swings in a steady arc, striking the stalks with a hollow thump. The sound is rhythmic, like a drum beat at a slow march. Bits of husk fly into the air, settling in your hair and clinging to your sleeves. You swing, turn, swing again. After a while, your breath comes heavier, your shoulders ache, and the cold sweat that creeps under your tunic chills you even faster. The floor is littered with loose grain. You gather it into a basket, brushing away the husks. This is winter's gold. Every kernel means another mouthful of bread, another meal that might be enough. You pour the grain into a sack and tie it off with a length of twine. Outside, the light has dimmed further. The pale afternoon sun hangs low, casting long shadows across the yard. You bring the sack inside, setting it by the wall, where the cold will keep it safe. The hearth fire is burning low again. You kneel to feed it more wood, coaxing the flames upward until they throw off real heat. With the tools mended, the grain threshed, and the trade with Tom completed, you could almost call the day successful. But winter days are never done early. There's always another task, a torn seam in your cloak, to stitch a cracked bucket, to patch a snare, to check in the woods before night falls. You thread a needle with a length of sturdy linen and set to work on the cloak. The stitches are uneven, but they'll hold. The fabric is heavy in your lap, smelling faintly of smoke in the outdoors. Each pull of the needle is a small victory against the wear and tear of the season. Outside, the wind moans low through the eaves. You glance toward the window, where the sky is deepening into that gray blue just before dusk. In a little while, you'll step outside again, the frost crunching underfoot, the air sharper than ever. But for now, the hearth is warm, the tools are ready, and the day's work is holding together, like you against the cold. And so, you finish the last stitch tie off the thread and sit back. The room is quiet, except for the faint crackle of the fire. You know there's more to come, but in this moment, the work has bought you a sliver of peace. The afternoon light has begun to thin, though the clock in your head says there's still work to be done before dusk. You step outside again, the wind slipping icy fingers down the back of your neck, despite your cloak's high collar. Today's next task is mending, spinning, and patching work that warms the hands but demands patience of the mind. The spinning wheel sits by the window, where whatever daylight the season offers can fall across it. You sit, pulling a bundle of raw wool from a basket. It's coarse and slightly greasy to the touch, still carrying the faint animal smell of the sheep. You begin teasing it apart, fingers working methodically to pull out burrs bits of straw and the occasional stubborn knot. The wool's texture is a reminder of how many hands touch a garment before it ever meets your skin. Once the fibers are clean enough, you twist them gently between thumb and forefinger, feeding them onto the spindle in a slow, steady rhythm. The wheel hums faintly as it turns, a sound that becomes almost hypnotic. Your foot works the treadle, the motion so familiar it feels like breathing. In this rhythm, time stretches out, not quickly, not slowly, just evenly. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the shutters. A few flakes of snow slip through a crack and land on the windowsill, melting into tiny beads of water. You glance toward the hearth, where the flames dance low, but steady. Every so often, you pause to feed them, because in this house, the fire is the true heartbeat of the day. A piece of worn linen waits on the table, a shirt with a tear along the shoulder seam. You thread a needle with fine, strong thread and begin stitching. The cloth is cool under your fingers, the weave slightly uneven. Each pull of the needle closes the gap, turning frayed edges into something whole again. It's the sort of work that seems small until you're wearing it on a morning when the frost bites hardest. You recall a time last winter when a seam gave way while you were out in the field. The wind had found that gap, immediately threading icy fingers along your skin until it burned. You had sworn then never to let a garment go unmended in winter, and the memory makes your stitches firmer now. Beside you, on the bench, a basket holds scraps of cloth wool from an old cloak linen from a worn-out tunic, even a strip of leather once part of a boot. Nothing is wasted. You cut small squares to patch the elbows of your work shirt, the fabric soft from years of wear. You sew them in place with long, even stitches, the thread biting into the cloth in neat lines. The air in the room smells faintly of wool smoke and the faint tang of iron from your needle. Outside, you can hear the muffled calls of neighbors, someone chopping wood, another herding chickens into their coop before nightfall. Life in the village slows with the sun, but no one truly stops until the light is gone. As you work, you remember the old stories about winter, spinning nights, when women gathered in one cottage to work together. sharing wool gossip and songs. Some accounts claim it happened every year. Others don't mention it at all. Whether it was custom or just a storyteller's flourish, the image lingers, hands busy with thread voices weaving through the dark like the fibers through the spindle. The shadows grow longer, and you set aside the patched shirt to work on the last task of the day's mending, reinforcing the hem of your cloak. The fabric is heavy, the color dulled from years of sun and smoke, but it's still thick enough to turn the wind. You stitch slowly, making each loop tight and secure. The cloak smells faintly of the outdoors, of frost and damp earth, and of every journey it has weathered with you. When the last stitch is tied, you fold the finished garments neatly and place them in a small chest by the bed. The spinning wheel is pushed back to its corner, the wool wrapped in cloth to keep out dust. The tools of this quieter labor are as vital as the axe or the flail, different work, but no less important in keeping the cold from winning. The fire has burned low again, and you kneel to feed it one last time before heading out for evening chores. The light from the hearth flickers against the walls, throwing long, wavering shadows that make the room feel smaller and more intimate. You pull on your mended cloak, feeling the weight of it settle across your shoulders. Outside, the cold is sharper now, the kind that cuts right through layers if you linger. The yard is quieter too, the chickens roosting, the cow settled in the barn. The air smells of wood smoke and the faint sweetness of hay. Above, the sky is shifting from gray to deep blue, and the first stars are beginning to blink awake. Your breath clouds in front of you as you make your way to the barn, checking the doors, making sure the animals are settled for the night. It's the same every evening in winter routine, unchanging, but each step feels like insurance against the long, frozen hours to come. And when you step back into the house, the warmth greets you like an old friend. The mended clothes rest neatly in the chest, the wool is ready for tomorrow's spinning, and the fire hums quietly in the hearth. It's enough to make you believe just for a moment that winter can be managed after all. The cold outside has sharpened since you last stepped in. It waits at the edges of the cottage, pressing against the door and slipping in through every gap in the walls. Evening is close enough that the shadows from the beams stretch long across the floor. This is threshing weather barn work that keeps you moving just enough to stay ahead of the chill. You pull on your patched gloves, the fingertips worn, shiny from years of use. The flail leans where you left it earlier, wood polished smooth by sweat and repetition. Grain still waits in the barn, piled in bundles, each stalk holding on to its treasure like a miser with coins. The work is simple, but it takes rhythm and a willingness to accept the dust that will cling to your skin, your hair, and even the inside of your mouth. Outside, the light is fading into that silver half-darkness that belongs to winter afternoons. Your boots crunch over frost as you cross to the barn. Inside, the air smells of dry chaff, an old wood warm compared to the yard, but still cool enough that you see your breath. A shaft of fading sunlight sneaks in through a gap in the wall, catching dust motes that drift and swirl like tiny golden insects. You lay the grain on the threshing floor, a hard-packed section of earth worn smooth over the years. The flail swings in your hands, striking the stalks with a thump that echoes in the rafters. The rhythm builds steady and sure, each blow freeing more kernels from their husks. Dust rises, clinging to your lashes, catching in your throat. You pause to wipe your forehead with the back of your sleeve, leaving a streak of chaff stuck to the damp skin. The work warms you, but it's the kind of heat that doesn't last once you stop moving. You keep the rhythm going, finding a strange sort of satisfaction in the sound of the flail's head meeting the earth. You think about the people in warmer lands who never have to do this in weather that can freeze your spit before it hits the ground. Lucky, or maybe just soft, you're not sure which. When the pile is threshed, you gather the grain into a wide basket. The kernels are pale gold warm from the friction of the work. You run your fingers through them, feeling their weight and knowing exactly how many loaves of bread they'll become. This is wealth in a winter village, small, tangible, and utterly necessary. You carry the basket to the far end of the barn, where a large sieve rests on a wooden frame. The grain pours through it, leaving the lighter chaff behind. It's slow work, but satisfying in its way, like filtering gossip until you're left with just the truth rare, but worth the trouble. Halfway through the sifting, you hear the low moo of your cow, the same tone she uses when she's not really hungry, but wants attention. You set the sieve aside and walk to her stall. Her large eyes meet yours, unblinking, and she shifts her weight from one hoof to another. You scratch her neck, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath the thick winter coat. She leans into your hand with surprising force, then returns to chewing, as if the moment never happened. By the time you finish sifting, the light has nearly gone. You store the clean grain in a heavy sack, tying it with a length of Tom's rope from the earlier trade. The barn doors groan as you close them against the night, the sound echoing into the still air. Back inside, the cottage smells faintly of stew again, though the pot is nearly empty now. You drop another log onto the fire, watching the flames catch and brighten the room. Dust still clings to you, a thin film on your face and in your hair. You shake your head, sending a cloud of it into the air, and laugh quietly. There's no escaping it, not until spring. You set the basket of chaff by the door. Some of it will be used for animal bedding, some for kindling if the woodpile runs too low. Nothing in winter is wasted, not when the season seems determined to take more than it gives. Your hands are rough from the cold, and the work tiny cracks forming at the knuckles. You rub a little fat from the stew pot into them. It smells faintly of onions, but does the job. The warmth from the hearth creeps into your bones again, slower this time, but steady. Through the window, the night has settled over the village. Smoke rises from chimneys into the dark, each thin column lit for a moment by the moon before disappearing. Somewhere, a dog barks once and is silent. You can almost hear the frost thickening on the thatched roofs. The tools are stacked neatly by the wall, the grain stored the barn closed for the night. It's the kind of quiet accomplishment that doesn't make songs or stories, but it's the backbone of living here. You lean back in your chair, letting the firelight paint the edges of the room in gold, and breathe in the familiar scent of smoke and wool. Tomorrow will bring the same work, threshing, mending, feeding, tending. But tonight the fire holds. The grain is safe, and the cold can wait outside. Morning comes, without fanfare, but you feel it, in the way the cold shifts against the walls, a softer, almost damp edge to the air. The chores today will take you to the edges of the fields, where winter labor keeps the village's boundaries and water channels in order. You pull on your cloak, still smelling faintly of smoke from last night, and step into the pale half-light. The frost underfoot crunches differently here, heavier where the ditches run. The hedges loom along the edge of the path, their branches stripped bare, each twig tipped with a bead of ice. You carry a bundle of fresh stakes under one arm and the mallet in your other hand. The mallet's handle is cold enough to make your fingers ache within minutes, but it's the only way to drive the stakes deep into the frozen ground. You start with the nearest section of hedge. The gaps are small, but small gaps become wide ones by spring, if left alone. Each stake takes 3, sometimes 4, heavy blows to bite deep enough. The sound carries in the still morning, a dull, satisfying thud that seems to hang in the air. Your breath comes in short clouds, matching the rhythm of your work. At the first ditch, you crouch to see how the winter rains have treated it. In some spots, ice spans the top like fragile glass. You break it carefully, with the mallet's head, the shards sliding into the water below. In others, mud has already begun to clog the flow, and you clear it with a stick, flicking clumps of frozen earth onto the bank. It's cold, wet work, but it will keep the fields from flooding when the thaw comes. Halfway down the line, you see a set of animal tracks, rabbit by the look of them darting from the hedgerow toward the ditch. The prints are fresh, the snow still crisp at the edges. You follow them for a moment, curiosity tugging at you, but they vanish into a tangle of brambles you're not eager to test with bare hands. Somewhere nearby, you hear the distant bark of a dog and wonder if it's on the same trail. From this edge of the field, the village looks small and self-contained. Roofs huddle close together, smoke drifting upward in soft, uneven lines. It's beautiful in a way, though you know beauty is a luxury the season doesn't always allow. You think about how many winters these boundaries have marked, how many years villagers have walked these same lines repairing what frost and wind try to undo. You work steadily driving stakes and clearing ditches until your shoulders feel the weight of the mallet with every swing. The cold has crept into your toes, despite the boots, and your breath feels sharp in your lungs. You take a break at the far edge, leaning against the hedge and letting your eyes wander over the frozen fields. The land sleeps under its frost, but you know it's just biding its time. Turning back, you spot an older section of hedge that's more gaps than branches. The wood there has rotted in places, the stakes leaning like tired men after a long march. You replace the worst of them, each blow ringing in your hands. A patch of moss on one stake catches your eye, still green under the frost, a small defiance against the season. By the time you reach the cottage again, the sky has begun its slow slide toward afternoon. The frost glitters faintly on the roofs, though in places the sun has softened it into damp that seeps into the thatch. You step inside shoulders, sore fingers stiff, but there's comfort in knowing the field edges are ready for whatever the rest of winter brings. The hearth fire is low, its embers glowing in a bed of ash. You kneel to feed it, kindling, watching the flames leap back to life. The warmth crawls into your palms, a welcome contrast to the bite of the mallet's handle still lingering in your skin. You set your tools in their place by the door, brush the frost from your cloak, and hang it where the heat can reach. Lunch is simple: a hunk of bread, a few slices of salted pork, and a cup of weak ale. You eat slowly, stretching the moment, letting the warmth and food seep into you. The bread is coarse, but fills the hollow in your stomach, and the pork's salt wakes your tongue after the bland air of the morning. Outside, the wind shifts, rattling the shutters. You glance toward the door, knowing there's still daylight left, and with it work. The far ditch toward the north field will need checking before the day is done, and you'll have to make the trip before the sun dips too low. But for now, you sit a little longer, letting the fire and the stillness hold you, before stepping back into the frost. And so, with the tools ready and the path ahead in mind, you rise from your seat cloak, warm again on your shoulders, and prepare to meet the cold once more. The north field always feels farther than it is, especially in winter. The path winds past a stand of bare willows, whose branches claw faintly at the sky, each one holding a thin sleeve of frost. You keep your cloak pulled tight, the wind pressing against it in slow, deliberate pushes. The ditch up here is less tended, fewer cottages in this direction, and that means more work for you today. The ground crunches underfoot, each step sounding sharper in the stillness. No birds call from the trees, no rustle in the hedges, only the whisper of the wind sliding along the frozen ditch. You crouch to inspect the first section water pooled and glazed with a layer of ice pale and cloudy. The ice cracks easily under the mallet's head, the sound echoing down the line. You scoop out leaves and frozen muck, your fingers numbing quickly, even through gloves. The smell of the earth rises faintly damp mineral and cold enough to bite the inside of your nose. A shadow moves at the corner of your vision. You look up to see the reeve approaching his cloak, snapping in the wind. He's the man who collects the Lord's dues for the season, and his visits are never casual. He stops a few paces away, looking down into the ditch as if judging your work. Good to see someone minding the boundaries. He says, though, his tone carries the weight of inspection more than praise. He asks about your grain stores, about the state of your roof, about the woodpile. Every question is a reminder that winter is as much about obligations as it is about survival. You answer plainly, knowing the less said, the better. The reeve nods, once the kind of nod that doesn't promise anything, and continues down the path, boots crunching in the frost. His figure disappears into the pale light, leaving behind only the faint smell of the tallow from his gloves. You return to work, breaking ice and clearing silt from the ditch. The cold seeps into your knees as you kneel, but you keep moving, knowing that stopping means letting it settle in deeper. You remember the old saying, "A ditch left clogged in winter is a field lost in summer." Whether it's true or just a farmer's way of keeping the work going, you've never risked testing it. Further along, you find where the bank has collapsed slightly. The frozen earth holds for now, but when the thaw comes, it will fall into the ditch entirely. You drive 2 short stakes into the edge to brace it, the blows muffled by the frost-hardened ground. The sound carries strangely, as if the cold itself is swallowing it. When you straighten your back, complains a slow burn from the constant crouching. You take a moment to stretch, looking toward the far ridge. From here, the village is a cluster of smoke threads and dark roofs, small against the wide sweep of the fields. The beauty of it catches you off guard. It looks peaceful, almost fragile, like it might vanish if you turned your back too long. By the time you've worked the full length of the ditch, the light has shifted toward afternoon. The shadows from the willows lie long across the path, thin and finger-like. Your gloves are stiff with frost at the fingertips, and the mallet's handle has left an ache in your palm that will last until night. You hoist the mallet onto your shoulder and start back toward the cottage. The walk home feels quieter than the walk out. Your thoughts drift to the reeve's visit, to the way his eyes lingered on the grain sacks. You wonder if the Lord's dues will rise again this year. You also think about the small repairs you saw in the hedge line that will need tending before the snow gets any heavier. Winter's to-do list never shortens, it only changes shape. Back at the cottage, you push the door open and are greeted by the slow, steady glow of the hearth. The air inside is warm, but tinged with the faint smell of damp wool drying near the fire. You set the mallet by the door and hang your cloak, brushing off bits of frost that tumble to the floor in pale crumbs. The stew pot is light in your hands when you lift it. There's just enough for a small bowl. You set it back on the hook over the fire, watching the steam rise as it loosens. The first spoonful is as much comfort as food, rich with barley and the lingering salt of pork. You eat slowly, the taste filling the quiet as much as the fire's soft crackle. Outside, the sky deepens toward evening, the color shifting from dull silver to the bruised blue of oncoming night. Through the window, you see the first lanterns flicker to life in the village. Somewhere far off, a dog barks twice the sound, carrying on the cold air before fading away. You stretch your legs toward the fire, the ache in your back softening with the heat. The day's work is done for now. The ditch cleared, the bank braced, the boundaries kept. Tomorrow will bring its own demands, but tonight the cold can wait outside a little longer. And as the shadows lengthen inside the cottage, you let the warmth and the quiet settle over you, a small fortress against the winter night. The morning breaks with a pale wash of light that barely pushes back the shadows. Today is market day if the roads cooperate. In winter, that's never certain. A hard freeze can turn the dirt track into a road of jagged ice. A sudden thaw can turn it into a quagmire thick enough to pull a boot right off your foot. But you've got a sack of grain to trade and a short list of things you can't do without until spring. So you pull on your cloak and step outside. The frost crunches under your boots as you cross the yard. Your breath clouds the air, and the sky has that washed-out blue that comes before snow. You sling the sack of grain across your shoulder. It's heavy, but it will fetch a fair trade if you're quick to the stalls before the best goods are gone. You lock the cottage door with a simple wooden latch. There's not much inside worth stealing, but habit is habit. The road to the village market winds past hedges stiff with frost and a few scattered cottages. You pass neighbors making the same journey, each bundled in layers of wool and leather. No one wastes breath on small talk in the cold. Greetings are mostly nods or brief waves. The only sound is the collective crunch of boots and the occasional creak of a wooden wheel. By the time the village square comes into view, the market is already alive. The stalls are crowded together like shoppers in a Walmart on Black Friday, just with fewer fistfights and more goats. Merchants shout about their wares, their voices turning to mist in the air. The smell is a strange mix of smoke, salted fish, damp wool, and the faint sweetness of baked bread. You make your way to the grain buyer, first hefting your sack onto his table. He inspects the kernels with a practiced hand, biting one between his teeth before nodding. The exchange is swift, your grain for a handful of coins and a promise of a better price in spring, though you know better than to count on it. From there, you slip into the thick of the crowd, scanning for what you need. Salt is first. Without it, the winter meat will spoil, and even your simplest meals will taste flat. You find a merchant selling coarse gray crystals packed in small linen sacks. They're heavy for their size, but worth the trade. Next is lamp oil, a small clay flask of the stuff sharp-smelling and precious in the long dark evenings. You tuck it carefully into your bag. A cloth merchant catches your eye, his stall draped in bolts of wool and linen. The colors are muted grays, browns a faded green, but the quality is better than you expected. You run your fingers over a length of wool, imagining it as a new tunic come spring. The price is steep, though, and you move on. At the far end of the square, you find a baker's stall. His bread is darker than yours, richer with a faint scent of honey. You trade for a small loaf, knowing it won't last the day once you taste it. Beside the bread are small cakes sprinkled with coarse sugar, and you can't resist buying one, an indulgence rare enough to feel almost dangerous. The cold seeps deeper as the day wears on the sun, never quite breaking through the clouds. You pull your cloak tighter, shifting your bag to the other shoulder as you make your final stop, the cobbler. Your boots are holding for now, but the soles are thin. The cobbler promises he can patch them next week if you bring them in payment in kind or coin. He doesn't care. With your errands done, you make the walk home the road, feeling longer with every step. The wind has picked up, carrying a fine dusting of snow that clings to your cloak and hair. Your hands ache even inside your gloves, the cold gnawing at your fingers until you curl them into fists for warmth. By the time you reach the cottage, the light is already fading. You set your bag on the table and pull off your cloak, brushing away the snow before it melts. The hearth is dark, and you kneel to coax the coals back to life. Soon the flames are licking at the logs, the heat blooming into the room. You unpack your goods, one by one, setting them neatly on the table. The salt catches the firelight, each grain a tiny spark. The lamp oil goes to the shelf above the hearth, the bread to the small larder, the sugar cake you keep for yourself, breaking off a piece and letting it dissolve on your tongue. Sweetness like this is rare enough that you close your eyes and savor it, letting the taste chase away the day's cold. Outside, the snow has thickened, swirling past the window in quick bursts. You sit by the fire, stretching your legs toward the heat, your bag of market goods within reach. The day has been long, but you have what you need, maybe even a little more than you expected. And as the wind rattles the shutters, you feel a small, quiet satisfaction in winter. Even a successful market day is a victory worth warming your hands by. The snow didn't stop overnight. By the time you open your eyes, the light creeping through the shuttered window is brighter than it should be, the kind of brightness that only comes when the world outside has been painted white. You push the cloak from your shoulders, roll from the straw mattress, and the chill snaps at you instantly sharper than a Midwest January when you forgot to scrape the windshield. The first sound you hear is the church bell, its tone muffled but steady through the snow. It rings slowly, pulling the village together for morning prayers. You stand pull on your thickest tunic and wrap your cloak tight, the wool heavy and smelling faintly of last night's smoke. The bell keeps ringing as you step outside your breath, puffing into the air in quick bursts. The yard is transformed. Every fence post wears a white cap. The hedges sag under the weight, and the path to the lane is a single smooth sheet. Your boots sink into the snow with a soft crunch each step, leaving a dark impression that's already beginning to fill in behind you. The air is so cold, it steals the moisture from your nose, leaving it dry and prickling. Neighbors are emerging from their cottages, cloaks and hoods, drawn tight heads bent against the breeze. No one walks quickly. The snow hides the ice underneath, and a careless step could mean a twisted ankle or worse. You fall into step with a few others, the group moving together toward the small stone church at the village's heart. The church door groans open, and a wave of warmth spills out, not much, but enough to make your face tingle as the blood returns. Inside, the air smells of beeswax candles and damp wool, the flickering light painting the walls in golden shadow. You find a place along the bench, the wood polished smooth from years of use. The bell falls silent, replaced by the murmured prayers of the congregation. You bow your head, words slipping into the rhythm you've known since childhood. The heat from the candles mingles with the faint warmth of bodies pressed close together. Outside, the wind howls briefly, a reminder that the snow hasn't given up. When the prayers end, the priest offers a short blessing for the season's endurance. His voice is low, and even the kind that could soothe a child or settle a restless animal. You file out with the others, the cold slapping your cheeks as the door swings open. The snow is falling again, light but steady, each flake catching the pale daylight before vanishing into the drift. On the walk home, you detour to the barn. The animals greet you with soft, expectant noises, the cow with a low, rumbling moo, the chickens with muted clucks. You fill their troughs, the water steaming faintly against the cold, and scatter grain for the hens. The cow's breath rolls out in warm clouds, her dark eyes following your every move. Back inside the cottage, the fire has burned down to embers. You kneel to feed it, kindling, coaxing the flames back to life. The heat creeps into your fingers slowly, the sting of thawing skin, both painful and welcome. You hang your cloak near the hearth, where the snow will melt into a small puddle on the floor. From the larder, you take a small loaf of bread and slice it thick. You toast it on an iron trivet over the fire, the smell filling the room, earthy, warm, comforting. A smear of soft cheese finishes it, and you eat it slowly, each bite, a reminder that not every winter morning needs to taste of barley and pork. Outside, the bell tolls again, this time faster, a signal that someone is in need. You step to the door, peering down the lane. Figures move quickly toward Marta's cottage, their shapes dark against the snow. You grab your cloak and follow boots crunching over the frozen path. Inside her home, the air is warm but tense. Marta is seated near the hearth, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, speaking in short breaths. She's not ill, just shaken. One of her roof beams gave way under the weight of the snow, sending a cascade of frost and thatch into the room. No one was hurt, but it will take quick work to repair before the next storm. The men of the village are already planning, voices low but determined. You step forward, offering your rope and a pair of wooden braces from your shed. The reeve nods, noting your contribution. Within minutes, tasks are assigned, clearing the broken thatch, setting new supports, packing the gaps with straw. The work will take the rest of the day, maybe into the evening. As you step back into the snow tools in hand, you realize the bell will keep ringing until the job is done, not as a warning, but as a call to every willing hand. And in a winter like this, answering that call is as important as tending your own fire. By the time you return to Marta's cottage, the repair work is already underway. The snow has been cleared from the roof, leaving a raw patch of exposed thatch and broken timbers. The air smells of wet straw and cold wood, the kind of scent that clings to gloves and lingers in your nose. You set down your rope, and braces stamping snow from your boots before joining the line of villagers, passing fresh bundles of thatch to the ladder. The ladder itself creaks under the weight of two men who balance awkwardly on its rungs, their gloved hands moving quickly to tie the bundles in place. The wind teases loose bits of straw from their work, sending them spiraling into the white air like golden snowflakes. You can feel it, cutting at your cheeks, sharper than a blade fresh from the whetstone. Your task is simple. Cut the rope into lengths for tying. The fibers are stiff in the cold, and you have to work the knife carefully to keep from fraying the ends. Each piece is passed upward, disappearing into the flurry of hands and voices above. The work has a rhythm to it. Cut pass, not pull, tight one you fall into without thinking. Occasionally, someone calls for more straw, and the bundles are carried from the stack at the far side of the yard. The snow there is trampled flat packed, hard by the constant shuffle of boots. A few hens confused by the disturbance wander close to peck at stray bits, their feathers puffed against the cold. You shoo one away gently, its feet leaving tiny star-shaped prints in the snow. Marta watches from a stool near the doorway, wrapped in blankets, her face lined but calm. She offers the occasional bit of advice, her voice carrying just enough to be heard over the hammering of wooden pegs into the fresh beams. You remember hearing years ago that she was once the fastest thatcher in the village. Now her skill is in knowing exactly where to look to spot a weak tie or a poorly packed seam. By midday, the gap in the roof is shrinking. The new thatch is packed tightly, each bundle overlapped to shed snow and rain. The wooden braces you brought are lifted into place, wedged against the beams to take the strain off the older timbers. You stand back for a moment to watch the breath steaming from your mouth as you take in the progress. It's satisfying work, visible, tangible, and it will keep Marta's hearth dry for the rest of the season. Someone passes you a cup of hot ale spiced faintly with cloves. It warms your hands even before you take a sip, the heat spreading slowly into your chest. The taste is sharp, but welcome a brief luxury in the middle of the labor. You think about how, in another century, someone might romanticize this kind of work, neighbors coming together under a bright winter sky. They might even forget the way your fingers go numb, the ache in your back, the sting of straw dust in your eyes. By late afternoon, the last bundle is tied in place, the final rope pulled tight. The men on the ladder climb down stiffly, their faces flushed from the cold and effort. The repaired section blends almost seamlessly with the old, save for the brighter color of fresh straw. You all step back to admire it, the satisfaction passing silently from one person to another. Inside, Marta's hearth is burning brightly. She insists everyone take a cup of stew before leaving the pot bubbling with barley carrots and bits of mutton. The heat in the room feels richer after hours, in the wind seeping into your bones and loosening the tension in your shoulders. You eat slowly, savoring the way the thick broth clings to the spoon. The conversation drifts to the weather, how much more snow the sky might be holding, whether the roads will stay passable for the market next week. Some recall winters, when drifts blocked the lanes for days, forcing people to travel by sled or not at all. The evidence is thin and interpretations are many, but one old man swears he once saw snow piled higher than the church door. When the bowls are empty and the cups drained, you gather your tools and step back into the early evening. The snow has stopped, leaving a stillness over the village that feels almost heavy. The repaired roof gleams faintly in the fading light, the fresh straw catching the last hints of the sun. Walking home, you notice the way the snow muffles every sound, the crunch of your boots, the faint creak of the rope over your shoulder, even the wind's usual hiss through the hedges. By the time you reach your cottage, the first stars are blinking awake above the dark silhouette of the trees. Inside, the fire is still alive, though low. You feed it a split log, watching the flames catch and grow. The smell of Marta's stew still lingers in your clothes, mingling with the smoke from your own hearth. You hang your cloak to dry and stretch your hands toward the fire, the skin red and rough from the cold. Tonight, the roof over Marta's head will hold the snow, will slide harmlessly down the fresh thatch, and the village will sleep, knowing one more weak point has been mended, and that in winter is no small thing. The morning after the roof repair feels quieter than most. The snow has settled into an unbroken sheet, smoothing over footprints and wheel ruts from the day before. You step outside into air so still you can hear the faint creak of the frost shifting on the branches above. The smell of wood smoke drifts faintly from every chimney, curling lazily toward a pale sky. Today's work begins in the kitchen, though not for cooking. There's been talk among the neighbors about vermin getting bold in the cold, slipping under thatch and through gaps in the walls in search of warmth. You've seen the signs yourself: tiny gnaw marks on the grain sacks, faint rustles at the edge of the firelight. It's time to do something about it. You start by clearing a space near the grain storage, moving the baskets and sacks so you can check the floor. The cold from the packed earth seeps through your boots, sharp enough to make you curl your toes. Sure enough, you find the smallest of gaps where the wall meets the floor, just wide enough for a determined mouse. You wedge a flat stone into the space, hammering it tight with the heel of your palm. On the shelf above the grain, sacks a pair of yellow eyes blinks at you from the shadows. It's the cat, a lean gray creature with a white slash across its nose. She's been half wild since she wandered into the village 2 winters ago, earning her keep by keeping the mouse population nervous. She blinks again, then slinks along the shelf and drops silently to the floor, tail curling in lazy confidence. You scratch behind her ear, feeling the warmth of her fur under your cold fingers. Old Marta swears cats steal breath from sleeping children. Tom insists they're guardians against spirits. Some accounts claim it happened every year. Others don't mention it at all. Whether myth or not, you're glad for her company. The cat follows you as you set small traps in the corners, simple loops of twine baited with grain. They won't catch much at once, but every little bit helps when food is precious. Outside, you fetch a bundle of dried herbs, rosemary and mint, said to keep vermin away. The scent is sharp and clean, a welcome change from the smoke and damp wool that dominate winter air. You hang small bundles near the grain, their green fading to gray in the dim light. With the storage secured, you turn to the kitchen table. The bread from market day has gone hard, so you break it into pieces for toasting. The cat sits on the bench watching every movement with the patient intensity of someone who knows the rules but hopes you'll break them. You drop her a crumb, which she sniffs, ignores, and then bats off the bench for sport. The fire is steady this morning, the log snapping quietly. You toast the bread until the edges darken, then smear it with a little pork fat saved from last week's roast. The taste is simple but rich, the fat melting into the warm bread. It's the kind of breakfast that makes you feel ready for the day's work, even if the day's work is mostly indoors. After eating, you sit near the hearth with a small basket of mending. A pair of woolen socks needs darning, the heels worn thin from days of trudging through frost. You work the needle in and out of the fabric, reinforcing the weak spots with new yarn. The rhythm is slow, steady, almost meditative. The cat curls into a ball at your feet, her purr a low, steady hum against the crackle of the fire. Every so often you glance at the traps. One has already caught a mouse, its small body still. You dispose of it, quickly resetting the loop. The cat lifts her head as if to comment, but says nothing, returning to her nap. Outside, the snow begins to fall again, light dry flakes that drift past the window. The sound is barely there, more a change in the air than a noise. You know the snow will keep falling for hours, maybe into the night. The thought is both comforting and daunting. Comforting because it will hide the mud and ice beneath. Daunting because every flake adds weight to the roofs and the hedges. In the late afternoon, you fetch more wood from the pile outside. The logs are cold and damp to the touch, their bark shedding bits of frost onto your sleeves. You stack them neatly by the hearth, brushing your hands together to chase off the chill. The fire rewards you with a burst of heat enough to make your cheeks flush. By evening, the traps have caught 2 more mice. You clear them away, satisfied that the grain will last a little longer without uninvited mouths. The cat stretches, yawns, and hops onto your lap as you sit back down. Her weight is a small comfort, her warmth seeping through the layers of your tunic. The day ends with the fire burning steady, the kitchen quiet, and the snow still falling outside. The grain is safe for now. The cat is content, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of having secured one more corner of your winter life. The snow has stopped by morning, leaving the world wrapped in a blanket so clean it almost feels wrong to disturb it. The sky is pale blue, the kind of color that makes you squint, even without the sun's glare. Today is for work by firelight, the kind that keeps your hands busy while your mind drifts. You set a pot on the hearth, early filling it with water from the bucket. As it warms, you gather your mending basket, not for clothes this time, but for patching a worn blanket. The edges have frayed threads, dangling like loose hair, and the middle is thinning in spots where it's been pulled over too many cold nights. The wool smells faintly of smoke and the faint sweetness of lanolin. You cut patches from an older scrap, matching the weave as closely as you can. The needle slides through the fabric with a muffled pop, the yarn tightening under your pull. Each stitch closes another gap, keeping the wind at bay, one small loop at a time. Outside, you can hear faint laughter, children taking advantage of the snow before the adults find work for them. The sound carries easily in the still air, softened by the drifts. By mid-morning, the patching is done, and you hang the blanket near the fire to warm. The smell of steam rises from it, mingling with the sharper scent of boiling water. You add a few sprigs of dried mint, not for cooking, but to scent the room, and the fragrance drifts slowly outward, cutting through the heavier smells of winter. The afternoon brings a different kind of work storytelling. In winter, tales have their own weight, especially when told by firelight with the snow piled outside. You settle into your stool, the patched blanket across your knees, and begin to recount one of the old village stories, how the first settlers braved a winter so harsh the river froze solid from bank to bank, and wolves walked across it as if it were a road. The children sitting on the floor widen their eyes, leaning closer to the fire. You embellish here and there, adding the creak of ice under heavy paws, the sound of breath in the cold night. Writings from the era leave the truth frustratingly unclear. But that's the beauty of winter tales. They grow in the telling, like snowdrifts along a wall. You break the tension with a gentler story, one about a farmer who tricked the frost by scattering salt in his fields, convincing the cold that the ground was already dead. The children laugh, the fire crackles, and for a moment the room feels warmer than it has all season. As the stories wind down, you bring out your spinning wheel. The wool you cleaned last week is ready, soft and carded into neat bundles. Your foot works the treadle, the wheel turning smoothly as the fibers twist into a fine, strong thread. The sound is steady, almost musical, the kind of rhythm that settles into the background until you realize you've been working for an hour without noticing. The thread winds onto the spindle thin and even. It will be used for mending or for knitting new socks, small comforts that make winter bearable. You think of the old saying, spin in the winter, wear in the spring. It's one of those truths no one argues with. Outside, the light begins to fade, the pale blue of morning, giving way to the muted gray of evening. Shadows lengthen across the room, and you feed another log to the hearth. The flames flare up, painting the walls in shades of gold and amber. The children drift off one by one, pulled home by parents or the promise of supper. The room grows quiet again, save for the hum of the wheel and the occasional pop from the fire. You work until the wool is gone, then set the wheel aside and stretch your legs toward the heat. Dinner is simple, a bowl of stew from yesterday, reheated until the vegetables soften again. You eat slowly, savoring the warmth as much as the taste. Outside, the snow reflects what little light remains, giving the night a faint ghostly glow. When you finally pull the patched blanket over your shoulders, it holds the heat of the fire and the faint scent of mint. The day's work is done. The stories told, the wool spun, and winter feels, if not easy, at least managed for another night. The wind woke you in the night, rattling the shutters and whispering through the cracks like it was testing every seam in the cottage. By morning, the sound has dulled to a low, steady moan. But the air inside feels heavier, almost damp. When you open the door, the cold hits you in a wave that carries the faint metallic taste of oncoming snow. Today feels like a day for tending to health, the kind of work that can't be put off in winter. You've felt the scratch in your throat since yesterday, and the village knows too well how quickly a cough can sweep through every home. You pull your cloak tighter, tucking a small basket under your arm, and head toward the herb shed. The shed's door sticks in the cold, and you push it open with your shoulder. Inside, the air smells of dried plants, sharp sage, sweet chamomile, the faint bitterness of yarrow. Bundles hang from the rafters in loose clusters, their colors faded to muted greens and browns. You take down a few sprigs of thyme for brewing a handful of dried elderberries and a strip of willow bark. The combination is old, simple, and dependable enough for a winter remedy. Back in the cottage, you set a pot of water over the fire. The hearth is slow to warm the flames, licking the logs lazily. You drop the herbs into the pot, the steam rising, with a scent that is both earthy and clean. The cat sits nearby, tail flicking lazily, watching you, with that look that says she's seen this all before. While the brew simmers, you fetch a small jar of honey from the shelf. It's thick and slightly crystallized, the last of the season's supply. You stir it into the pot, watching the golden threads dissolve into the dark liquid. The sweetness will take the edge off the bitter herbs and soothe your throat in a way no plain water could. You pour a cup and cradle it between your hands, letting the warmth seep into your skin before taking a cautious sip. The taste is strong, sharp, from the thyme mellowed by honey, with the faint tang of berries at the end. It chases the chill from your chest, replacing it with a slow, creeping heat. The wind outside shifts, bringing with it the muffled sound of a knock at the door. When you open it, Tom stands there, his nose red and his voice rough. He's heard you still have herbs, and his youngest is coughing through the night. You nod, stepping aside to let him in. While you mix a bundle of thyme and elderberries for him to take, he talks about how this winter feels longer than most, how even the animals seem slower. He leaves with the bundle, and you watch him go, the snow beginning to cling to his shoulders before he's halfway down the lane. You sip your brew again, feeling the warmth spread. By midday, you decide to make a second pot, this one for storing. You fill a clay jug, cork it tight, and set it near the hearth where it won't freeze. If the cough worsens, you'll be ready. If not, the brew will be a small comfort on the coldest evenings. The rest of the day is quiet work, checking the smoke hole to make sure it's clear, brushing the hearth free of ash, and bringing in enough wood to last the night. Each log you stack feels heavier than the last, the kind of work that leaves your arms pleasantly tired. Evening brings a softer wind, but the air outside is still sharp. You sit by the fire, with your cup wrapping the patched blanket around your shoulders. The cat curls up in your lap, purring like a kettle just before it boils. Your throat feels less raw, and the heaviness in your chest has eased. The snow begins again, just after nightfall. Small flakes swirling in the firelight outside the window. You sip the last of your brew, listening to the wind lose its edge, and think about how small acts a pot of herbs, a shared bundle, can hold the cold at bay, almost as well as the fire. And tonight, both are working in your favor. The night passed without a storm, but the morning air carries a sharper edge, the kind that seeps straight through wool and bone. You step outside with the bucket in hand, your breath spilling in white plumes that vanish almost instantly. The frost underfoot crackles like thin glass with each step toward the barn. The animals stir as you open the door. The cow shifts in her stall, the sound of her hooves soft against the straw. Her breath rises in slow clouds, warm and damp, and for a moment you stand there just to feel the heat she throws into the cold space. She watches you with calm, dark eyes as you pour fresh water into her trough, the surface steaming faintly. She drinks deeply, each swallow loud in the quiet morning. From the loft above, the faint scurry of something small reaches your ears. Likely a mouse braving the barn for leftover grain. The cat has been spending more nights out here lately, leaving her faint paw prints in the frost outside the barn door. Whether she catches them all or simply keeps them nervous, you're not sure, but it's enough to keep the damage to a minimum. You scatter grain for the chickens next, their soft clucks filling the air. They move slowly, today feathers puffed out, reluctant to leave the warmer corners of their roost. One hen eyes you with what can only be described as suspicion before pecking at the feed. Stepping outside, you notice the sky is a deeper blue than it has been for days. It's the kind of color that comes before a hard freeze, and you know tonight's watch will be colder than most. The path toward the north edge of the yard is lined with small drifts, the snow sculpted by wind into sharp ridges. You follow it toward the woodpile boots, sinking slightly into the powder. The pile is lower than you'd like. You pull the axe from its stump, the handle cold and smooth in your hands, and choose a log from the stack. The first swing bites deep, the sound ringing out across the still yard. Splinters of frost fly from the cut, catching the light like tiny shards of glass. You work steadily, each strike warming you in brief, sharp bursts. Soon, you have a small heap of split logs, their pale cores steaming slightly in the cold air. Back inside, you stack the new wood near the hearth. The flames welcome the fresh fuel snapping and flaring as you settle onto the stool. You let the heat work into your fingers before pulling on your cloak again. There's one more task before evening. The snares in the far hedgerow need checking. The walk is longer than you remember, the snow making every step a little heavier. The hedgerow stands tall against the wind, its branches thick with ice. You crouch to inspect the first snare empty. The second holds a small rabbit already stiff from the cold. You take it gently, tucking it into your bag. It's not much, but in winter, every bit of meat is a gift. By the time you return to the cottage, the sun is dipping low. You skin the rabbit quickly, the knife blade glinting in the firelight, and set the meat aside for tomorrow's stew. The pelt you stretch on a small frame by the hearth, where it will dry slowly over the coming days. Evening settles in with a deepening chill. You pull your chair closer to the fire, a mug of warm ale in hand. Outside, the wind stirs, and you catch the faint howl of something farther off, a wolf maybe, or just the wind playing tricks through the trees. Either way, it makes you glance toward the door, ensuring the latch is firmly set. Night watch comes quietly. You step outside once more, the cold biting harder than before. The yard feels larger in the dark, each shadow a little too still. You walk the perimeter, listening to the crunch of your boots, the occasional creak from the barn. Above the stars are sharp and bright, scattered across the sky like frost on black stone. When you finally return inside, the warmth greets you like an old friend. The fire hums low, the rabbit pelt hangs ready to dry, and the night beyond the door can keep its watch on its own. For now, you've done enough to keep the cold at bay. The cold has a way of counting time in winter. You don't measure the days by the sun, which rises late and sets early, but by how quickly the stores in your cottage dwindle. This morning, you take stock of what's left. The grain sacks stand in their corner, each tied with twine and dusted faintly with chaff. You untie the first and plunge your hand inside, feeling the kernels slide between your fingers. It's still heavy enough to ease your mind for now, but the second sack is lighter than you'd like. You make a note in your head, fewer loaves this week, maybe more broth and less bread. In the cupboard, the smoked pork hangs from a beam darkened and firm. You count the pieces, 6 good cuts, 2 smaller ones that should be used soon. Hanging beside them, a few strings of dried beans rattle softly when you brush against them. The sound is almost cheerful, though it also feels like a reminder of how few there are. You step back, letting your eyes run over the shelves. Jars of pickled turnips, a small crock of salted fish, and the last onions from autumn's harvest, their papery skins rustling as you lift them. They're starting to soften just enough to tell you that any careless storage could turn them before the month is out. The woodpile inside is holding steady. You've been careful to bring in only what you'll burn in a day, the rest stacked outside under its covering of snow. Every log indoors smells faintly of the frost it's left behind. The smaller kindling is nearly gone, so you decide to split more before nightfall. With the inventory taken, you pull your cloak around you and step outside. The snow is crisp underfoot, the air clear enough to see the faint outline of the far hills. Your breath curls in steady puffs as you head toward the covered woodpile. The axe rests where you left it yesterday, blade propped safely against the chopping block. You choose a log from the pile, setting it upright on the block. The first swing lands solid, sending a satisfying crack through the cold air. The split pieces tumble apart, their fresh wood pale against the gray of the old. You work steadily, letting the rhythm warm you, pausing now and then to flex your hands. The cold tries to settle in your fingers, but the movement keeps it from getting too far. Back inside, you stack the kindling neatly near the hearth. The fire is burning low, the embers glowing red through a bed of ash. You feed it a few smaller pieces, watching the flames catch and climb. The warmth begins to creep outward, loosening the tightness in your shoulders. The afternoon is spent preparing a small meal. You choose one of the smaller cuts of pork, trimming it carefully, and setting the fat aside for later. The meat goes into the pot with a handful of beans and one of the softening onions. As it simmers, the air in the cottage fills with a scent both rich and grounding. While the stew cooks, you take a scrap of chalk and mark the inside of the cupboard door with your counts. Grain 2.5 sacks, pork 6 cuts, beans 2 strings, onions 7. It's a quiet ledger, but one that speaks louder than words. Each mark is a reminder that winter isn't just about staying warm. It's about staying ahead of the hunger that waits patiently for mistakes. When the stew is ready, you ladle a small bowl, the steam fogging your face. The broth is hearty, the beans soft, the pork tender enough to flake with a touch of the spoon. You eat slowly, savoring the heat that spreads from your mouth to your chest. The onion adds a sweetness that almost makes you forget it's a measure against spoilage, not a luxury. After eating, you set the remaining stew aside to cool before storing it in the covered pot by the window. The cold from outside will keep it safe until tomorrow. You wipe the table brush, the crumbs into your palm, and toss them out the door for the birds, if any are bold enough to venture this close to the cottage. As evening approaches, you step outside once more, the snow crunching softly under your boots. The village is quiet smoke, rising from chimneys in thin, wavering threads. The air has that still heavy feel that warns of a deeper cold to come. You pull your cloak tighter, scanning the horizon for signs of weather. Back inside, you check the woodpile one more time, adding a few extra logs to the stack near the hearth. The firelight flickers against the walls, painting the room in shades of gold and shadow. You sit with your back to the cupboard, feeling the weight of the supplies behind you, a quiet comfort in the middle of winter's demands. Outside, the first stars appear sharp and steady in the clear sky. You know tomorrow will be colder, maybe hard enough to freeze the well's surface solid. But tonight, the fire is strong, the cupboard is not yet bare, and the marks in chalk tell you there's still time before the count runs too low. And in winter, time is as precious as the food itself. The cold deepens overnight, pressing against the walls with a patience that feels almost deliberate. By morning, the frost on the inside of the shutters is so thick you have to scrape it away just to let in a little light. Today will be a day for braving the paths. There are visits to make and news to carry. In winter, information moves more slowly than the snow drifts. And sometimes, you trade gossip the same way you trade grain or cloth. You pull on your heaviest boots, the soles stiff with cold, and wrap your patched cloak tight. The scarf you wind around your neck smells faintly of smoke from the hearth, the scent comforting in its familiarity. You tuck a small bundle of eggs into your bag, wrapped in straw to keep them from breaking. There'll be payment for the information you hope to collect. The lane out of the village is narrow, the snow packed by the few travelers who've passed since the last storm. Your boots crunch over the frozen path, the sound carrying far in the still air. The hedges stand tall and bare on either side, their branches etched with frost like fine silver lines. Every so often, a small bird darts from the branches, vanishing into the whiteness ahead. Your first stop is Tom's cottage. He answers the knock, quickly pulling you inside before too much cold escapes. His wife is mending a shirt by the fire, her needle moving with quick practice stitches. Tom accepts the eggs with a nod, then pours you a cup of warm ale from the pot, hanging at the edge of the hearth. It smells faintly of cloves, and something sweeter, maybe honey, if they've been lucky. You sit wrapping your hands around the cup as Tom shares the latest. The market road to the next village is still open, though the snow is drifting high on the north stretch. A trader passed through yesterday, selling lamp oil and salt at prices that made even the reeve frown. There's talk of wolves seen closer to the village than usual, their tracks spotted near the frozen creek. In return, you share what you've heard Marta's roof repair holding against the snow. The grain buyer in the market promising a better price come spring, the well at the far end of the green freezing over entirely. It's not just news. It's the threads that keep the village woven together through the long season. When the cup is empty, you rise thanking them for the warmth and the talk. Outside, the air feels sharper, the light already tilting toward afternoon. You follow the path toward the next stop, your boots sinking slightly where the snow has drifted. The sky above is pale and hard, a color that hints at more snow on the way. The second visit is to old Marta herself. She greets you with a dry laugh, her voice rough but warm. Her cottage smells of dried herbs and the faint tang of the river. She presses a small pouch into your hand, rosemary and mint, for steeping in water to keep the air clear. If you believe such things, she says with a wink, but even if you don't, it smells better than a closed-up room in February. You trade her a few onions from your store, smaller than she might like, but still sound. She insists you sit for a moment, pouring you a thin broth flavored with wild thyme. As you sip, she tells you a story about the winter, when the snow came so fast the church bell froze in place, the clapper stuck mid-swing. Some historians think this was common. Others call it pure myth. You don't say what you believe, only that you can picture it easily enough. Leaving Marta's, you head toward the final stop, a cottage near the edge of the woods where a young couple lives. They've been keeping to themselves since the baby came last autumn, but winter doesn't allow for long silences between neighbors. You knock gently, and the new mother answers, cheeks flushed from the heat inside. She accepts the rosemary pouch you pass her, the scent filling the doorway instantly. In return, she gives you a small loaf of bread, darker than the market's and flecked with seeds. Baked before the fire was even warm this morning, she says with a tired smile. The baby sleeps nearby, wrapped so tightly you can barely see his face. The walk home feels longer than the journey out, your bag now heavier with bread and the faint fragrance of herbs. The snow crunches differently underfoot, drier, sharper, which tells you the temperature is still dropping. By the time the cottage comes into view, the light has faded to that dim silver gray that belongs only to deep winter afternoons. Inside, you shake the frost from your cloak and set your bag on the table. The bread goes to the larder, the rosemary to the shelf above the hearth. You feed the fire until it's strong again, the heat chasing the cold from your fingers. Dinner tonight will be simple, a slice of the new bread, toasted and spread, with the last of the soft cheese and a cup of broth brightened with Marta's rosemary. The flavors are plain, but the warmth is what matters most. As you eat, the wind picks up outside, rattling the shutters and sifting fine snow against the door. When the meal is finished, you sit by the fire, the rosemary scent curling into the air. You think of the day's visits, of the news traded, and the quiet reassurances exchanged. In winter, those small connections are as necessary as food or fire. And tonight, with the bread tucked safely in the larder and the herbs ready for use, you feel the thread that ties you to your neighbors, holding fast against the season's pull. The morning starts slow, with the fire burning low and the frost painting thin white ferns across the inside of the window glass. You sit for a long moment on the edge of the bed, listening to the quiet no footsteps in the lane, yet no distant chopping from the woodpile at Tom's no church bell. It feels like the kind of day meant for staying inside, but the chalk marks on your cupboard door say otherwise. Today is for planning, not just the next few hours, but the weeks ahead, the stretch between now and when the first thaw softens the ground. You pull your stool up to the table, spreading a small scrap of parchment in front of you. The charcoal stick is short, its end smudged from use, but it will serve. You start with the food. The 2 sacks of grain will last another month. If you measure carefully, no extra loaves, no thick porridge, unless you've had a day of heavy labor. The smoked pork, now 5 good cuts, must be rationed to once every 5 or 6 days. Beans can fill the gap, though they need more firewood to cook through, and firewood is its own kind of currency in the cold. Then there's the question of repairs. The roof held through the last snow, but the north edge of the thatch is sagging under its weight. You'll need help to pack it tighter before the next heavy fall. Tom might trade a morning's work for one of the smaller pork cuts if you catch him between his own chores. The wooden latch on the barn door has swollen with the damp sticking each time you open it. That one you can fix yourself with a plane and patience. You pause to sip from your cup of morning broth, the rosemary still fragrant from yesterday's bundle. It clears your head, though it does nothing to stop the cold creeping into your toes. You shuffle closer to the fire, letting the warmth chase it back a little. The next list is for seeds. You keep them in a clay jar, tucked high on the shelf. Barley beans, a little rye, and a handful of cabbage seeds from last year's plants. If the thaw comes early, you'll need them ready. You count them slowly, each one a promise of green against the snow. They look small and unimpressive in your palm, but they're as valuable as coin. Beside the seeds, you find the chalk you used for marking stores. You add a note wood low. The pile outside has been shrinking faster than you'd like. Between keeping the house warm and cooking each meal, the logs burn down to ash too quickly. You think about taking a day to fell another small tree from the edge of the copse, though the work will be heavy in the frozen ground. The cat wanders in from the barn, shaking bits of straw from her coat. She leaps onto the table without ceremony, scattering your parchment and sitting directly on the corner of your plans. You scratch under her chin, and she leans into it, purring like a kettle starting to boil. Her visits are always like this, half affection, half a reminder that you don't control much in this season, least of all her. By midday, the light has shifted bright but thin. You decide to walk the boundary of your small plot, checking for any signs of drift or damage. The snow crunches underfoot, the air sharp and dry. The hedges stand where they should, though one section near the south ditch leans under the weight of ice. You shake it gently, sending a shower of frost into the air. It glitters briefly in the sunlight before settling back into the drift. Near the barn, you spot small prints in the snow fox, by the size of them circling close to the chicken coop. You make a note to check the boards and wire tomorrow, tightening anything that might give way under determined claws. For now, the hens seem unbothered, their soft clucking drifting from inside the coop. Back inside, you warm your hands over the fire before sitting to finish the plan. You draw a rough map of the next month, marking which days will be for wood cutting, which for repairs, and which for trips to market if the roads allow. You leave space for the unexpected. Winter always has surprises, most of them unwelcome. As the afternoon deepens, you pull out a small piece of chalky soapstone and begin marking the cupboard door again. Grain 2 sacks, pork 5 cuts, beans 1.5 strings, wood low, seeds ready. It's a sparse list, but it's enough to work with. The fire burns brighter as evening comes on its light, filling the cottage with a kind of golden calm. You ladle out a small bowl of yesterday's stew, reheating it slowly so the flavors meld. The first bite is warm and savory, the beans soft, the broth thickened just enough. You eat it with a slice of the seeded bread from the young couple, the crunch a welcome change from the usual fare. Outside, the sky has gone that deep bruised blue that signals the coldest nights. You can feel it pressing at the walls, already testing for weaknesses. You feed the fire again, watching the flames rise higher, and think about how the plane on your table is less about comfort and more about defiance. In the heart of winter, planning isn't just about surviving. It's about reminding yourself that the season won't win without a fight. And tonight, with your stores counted and your days mapped, you feel ready to meet it head on. The final stretch of winter always feels the longest. You wake before the sun, the pale light still crouching beyond the horizon, and listen to the sounds inside your cottage, the gentle pop of the fire settling in the hearth, the faint scratch of the cat grooming herself in the corner, the creak of the roof timbers under their frozen burden. The air is calm this morning, but the calm feels like it's holding its breath. You move slowly, letting the warmth from the blanket linger a little longer before your feet meet the cold floor. The first order of the day is the fire. You crouch to feed it, kindling, coaxing the embers back to life until the flames rise in soft orange folds. The heat begins to stretch into the room, loosening the cold's grip on your fingers. Today's work is quieter. No big repairs, no long trips to the market or distant ditches to clear. Instead, you turn to the tasks that keep the mind steady, checking the seed jars again, turning the drying rabbit pelts, brushing the ash from the hearthstones. These are not chores of urgency, but of rhythm. The kind that remind you winter is not endless, only persistent. You take a moment to open the shutter, just a crack. Outside, the world is a still life of white and gray. The snow has settled in gentle curves along the hedges, the trees holding small crowns of frost on every branch. The air smells clean, almost sweet, like cloth dried in sunlight, though the sun itself is still hiding. Pulling on your cloak, you step outside with a small basket to gather kindling from the edges of the yard. Your boots crunch softly on the packed snow, each step, a quiet echo in the frozen air. Near the hedge, you find twigs scattered by the wind, their ends dry enough to snap cleanly. You gather them in careful bundles, tucking them into the basket until it's full. Back inside, you set the kindling by the hearth and pour yourself a cup of warm broth from last night's pot. The rosemary still scents the steam curling into your nose and warming you from the inside out. You drink slowly, letting the heat spread through your chest, and watch the fire's light dance across the walls. Mid-morning brings a knock at the door. It's Marta, wrapped in a heavy cloak, with snow dusting her shoulders. She carries a small bundle freshly spun yarn, soft and still smelling faintly of sheep. Thought you might find use for it, she says, setting it on the table. You thank her, and in return, you pass her a small jar of dried mint from your shelf. The trade is simple, almost wordless, but the warmth in it is as real as the fire. After she leaves, you sit with the yarn in your lap. The fibers are strong and even perfect for knitting a new pair of mittens. You fetch your needles from their place on the shelf and begin the slow, steady work. The clack of wood against wood joins the fire's crackle, a quiet duet that fills the room. Each row grows beneath your hands, the pattern forming in small, deliberate steps. Outside, the light has shifted toward afternoon. You pause in your knitting to stir the pot on the hearth. A thin stew today, mostly beans, with a few shreds of pork for flavor. The smell is rich despite its simplicity filling the air, with something that feels like security. You decide to take a short walk before the sun dips too low. The snow underfoot is firm, the air still and cold enough to make your breath hang like mist. You follow the path toward the edge of the fields, where the land slopes gently toward the frozen creek. The ice there is smooth and pale, the surface dusted with snow, except where the wind has swept it clean. You stand for a moment looking out over the stillness, feeling the quiet settle into your bones. On the walk back, you notice the first hints of sunset, a wash of pale gold along the horizon, the kind that promises a clear, cold night. The village is already retreating indoors, thin columns of smoke rising from every chimney. You step back into your cottage, shaking the snow from your boots, and feel the welcome embrace of the fire. Evening settles gently. You eat your stew by the hearth, the bowl warm in your hands, and think about the weeks ahead. The days will still be short, the nights still sharp with frost. But the seeds in their jars are waiting. The tools are mended, and the stores, though lighter, are holding. After supper, you finish the last rows of the first mitten, the yarn, soft and warm, against your palms. You set it aside and feed the fire one last time for the night, watching the flames flare and then settle into a steady glow. The cat curls in her usual spot paws, tucked beneath her eyes, half closed in contentment. Before bed, you open the shutter just enough to see the night sky. The stars are bright scattered across the dark, like frost on black stone. The air is so still, you can hear the faint creak of the trees beyond the hedge. You take a long breath, letting the cold fill your lungs, and then close the shutter again, sealing the warmth inside. You lie down, with the patched blanket pulled over you, the faint scent of rosemary still lingering in the air. The fire hums quietly, the room bathed in a soft amber light. Outside, winter holds the land in its patient grip, but inside, you've carved out a pocket of peace. And as your eyes grow heavy, you remember what every winter teaches, that endurance is made not of grand victories, but of small, steady acts, each one a quiet refusal to let the cold win.